Richard Whitmore did not answer right away. For the first time since the meeting had started, the confidence in his posture seemed less like strength and more like calculation. Claire Bennett slowly lowered her pen onto the table, the soft click sounding louder than it should have. Monica Hayes turned a page with careful fingers, her red nails tapping once against the paper before going still. Daniel Reeves cleared his throat, but whatever he had been about to say died somewhere behind his teeth. Naomi stood exactly where she was, beside the housekeeping cart with the lemon-scented cleaner and the stack of folded towels, her pulse moving fast in her neck even though her face gave nothing away. She had learned years ago that if powerful people sensed hesitation, they mistook it for permission. Claire shifted in her chair and looked at Richard, not with panic, but with the hardening focus of someone beginning to smell smoke before seeing flame. "Is there a reason voting rights change in Q2?" she asked. Richard gave a thin smile and spread one hand over the table. "That is standard transitional language," he said. "Temporary governance protection. It keeps a fragile company from making emotional decisions during restructuring." He said it smoothly, the way men like him always did, like the truth should feel embarrassed for arriving late. But now the room had changed. Monica leaned forward and scanned the page again. Daniel reached for his glasses, slid them on, and bent lower over the contract. Naomi watched his mouth tighten at one corner. That was all she needed to see. A lawyer never did that unless a sentence had started to move in the wrong direction. Claire noticed it too. "Daniel," she said quietly, "is it standard?" Daniel did not answer immediately. His finger moved line by line down the page, paused, went back, then followed a cross-reference into an appendix stapled near the end of the packet. The overhead lights reflected off the polished table and turned every face pale. Naomi could smell fresh coffee going cold near the sideboard. She could hear the faraway hum of traffic 42 floors below. Then Daniel exhaled through his nose and sat back half an inch. It was a small movement, but the kind that changed a room. "The clause does transfer provisional voting control," he said carefully, "under a revenue shortfall event." Claire did not blink. "And who defines the shortfall?" Daniel turned another page. "The Investor Oversight Committee." Monica looked up sharply. "Which would be his people?" Richard laughed once, but there was no warmth in it now. "That is a dramatic way to phrase governance support." Naomi finally spoke again, her voice low and even. "It is not support if the benchmark is impossible to hit after layoffs, restructuring fees, and debt servicing all land in the same quarter." Every eye in the room shifted back to her. Richard's jaw set. "You seem unusually interested in this deal for someone pushing a cleaning cart." Naomi met his stare. "I am interested because page 27 says labor reductions begin immediately after control transfer." Monica flipped there so fast the paper snapped. Claire turned toward her. "How many jobs?" Monica scanned the paragraph, and the color in her face thinned under the conference room lights. When she answered, her voice was barely above a whisper. 83 in Phase 1. Naomi said nothing after that. She did not need to. The silence that followed was no longer hers to carry. It belonged to all of them now. Richard Whitmore reached for the contract as if paper itself could restore control, but Claire placed her hand over the folder before he could turn another page. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was small, almost precise, yet it stopped him all the same. The city light behind her had shifted toward late afternoon now, flattening the sky into pale silver, and the glass walls of the conference room reflected everyone back at themselves in cold, faint doubles. Monica Hayes was still staring at page 27, lips parted slightly, her expression caught somewhere between disbelief and disgust. Daniel Reeves had gone very still, the kind of stillness that came when a professional realized he had just watched a deal tilt from elegant to dangerous in less than 2 minutes. Naomi remained by the wall with the housekeeping cart at her side, the rubber wool pressed against the baseboard, the scent of citrus cleaner hanging in the room like something too ordinary to belong in a place where millions of dollars were changing shape. Claire looked at Monica first. "Phase 1 means immediately?" she asked. Monica nodded once, eyes still on the paragraph. "Within 30 days of control transfer," she said. "Administrative staff, support divisions, facilities, overnight. Maintenance." Her voice slowed on that last category. She did not need to say more. Naomi felt the words land anyway. Overnight maintenance. People who came in after the executives left. People whose names never made it into speeches or annual reports. People like her. Richard adjusted his cuff and gave a faint, dismissive smile. Every restructuring requires difficult decisions, he said. You hired me to protect this company from collapse, not preserve sentiment. Claire turned toward him, and something in her face had changed. The politeness was still there, but it no longer led the room. Protect it for whom? She asked. Richard opened his mouth, but Naomi spoke before the answer arrived. For the people holding the committee seats after the trigger. Daniel looked up sharply at that. How do you know about the committee structure? He asked. Naomi hesitated for just a fraction of a second, enough for Richard to catch. He leaned back, pouncing on the pause with a smile that showed more teeth than warmth. Yes, he said. I would love to hear that too. His gaze traveled over her uniform again, slower this time, heavier with contempt. Because either this building has the most overeducated janitorial staff in Manhattan, or someone here is performing for attention. The insult did what he wanted it to do. It changed the air. One of the junior associates shifted uncomfortably. Another looked down at his notes. Even Claire did not interrupt right away. Naomi could feel the heat rising under her collar, not from shame, but from the familiar pressure of being forced to justify knowledge that would have been applauded in anyone else. She set the microfiber cloth down on the cart, smoothing it once with her palm, giving her hand something steady to do. I know because the cross-reference points to Appendix 4, she said. And Appendix 4 creates the Oversight Committee. 3 investor seats, 1 temporary advisory seat from your side, and full authority over operational cuts if revenue drops below the number he set. Daniel flipped pages fast now, his fingers no longer careful. Paper whispered across the table. He found the appendix, read it, then removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose like the room had become too bright. Richard's expression hardened. This is absurd, he said. Claire, if you allow support staff to derail executive negotiations, you are proving my concerns about your leadership. That one landed differently. It was meant for her, not Naomi. A cleaner could be dismissed. A chief executive officer could be pressured. Claire heard it. Monica heard it too. Daniel heard all of it. Naomi saw the moment Claire recognized the move for what it was. Not advice. Not strategy. Control. Spoken early, before the ink had dried. For a long second, no one spoke. The only sound in the conference room was the muted rattle of the heating system and the faint tap of sleep beginning to touch the windows high above the avenue. Claire Bennett leaned back slowly in her chair, studying Richard Whitmore the way people studied a bridge after hearing the first crack. Then she turned to Naomi. How did you catch it? She asked. It was a simple question, but the room shifted around it. Richard made a quiet sound of irritation, as if even asking her that much was beneath the dignity of the meeting. Daniel Reeves looked up from the appendix, waiting now, not skeptical anymore, but alert. Monica Hayes folded her hands on the table and kept her eyes on Naomi with a focus that felt almost protective. Naomi did not answer immediately. She looked down at the cloth she had smoothed flat on the cart, at the pale blue fibers darkened in one corner from glass cleaner, at her own hands, steady now even though her heartbeat still pressed hard against her ribs. She knew the danger of speaking too much in rooms like this. The first truth was tolerated only when it was useful. The second truth made people uncomfortable. But Claire had asked, and something in her voice had not sounded like a challenge. It had sounded like respect trying to arrive before fear pushed it back out the door. Naomi lifted her gaze. Because I have seen language like that before, she said. Richard exhaled through his nose. Here we go. Claire did not even look at him. Let her finish. Naomi felt the words settle around her like a door, quietly closing on the wrong kind of noise. She drew one breath and kept her voice even. When I was 19, my father signed papers for a supply business in Newark. It was not a deal this size, but it was the same kind of trick. The contract sounded generous. Expansion. Money. Shared risk. Temporary oversight. Words that looked safe until the numbers slipped and control changed hands. The room stayed still. Naomi could see it as she spoke, not like a memory softened by time, but sharp and bright as broken glass under kitchen lights. Her father at the dining table in a white undershirt and reading glasses from the pharmacy. The smell of coffee gone burn on the stove because no one had remembered to turn it off. Her mother pacing near the refrigerator, saying the investor seemed polished, educated, trustworthy. The paper looked harmless. That was the cruelty of it. harm that dressed itself in grammar. He lost everything in 8 months, Naomi said. Not because he was careless. Because he believed the language was there to protect him. Daniel lowered his eyes for a moment, and Monica pressed her lips together. Richard tried to laugh, but it came out thin. So now we are basing corporate decisions on family trauma? Naomi turned to him then, really turned, and there was nothing loud in her face, nothing reckless, just a calm so complete it made his voice feel smaller than he intended. No, she said. You are basing your deal on the idea that no one in the room would read past the polished words if the person who noticed them wore gloves and pushed a cart. The sentence landed hard because it did not need force. Claire looked at the contract, then at Naomi, then finally at Richard, and this time the silence in the room did not feel uncertain. It felt like judgment gathering its papers. Richard Whitmore's smile did not return after that. It thinned, then disappeared altogether, leaving his face looking older and far less polished than it had 20 minutes earlier. The confidence that had filled the room when he arrived now seemed to cling to him like a jacket cut for a different season. Claire Bennett closed the contract with deliberate care and rested both palms on the folder, as if she were keeping something poisonous from spreading farther across the table. Outside, the sleet had thickened into a gray shimmer against the windows, softening the skyline until the towers across the avenue looked ghosted and far away. Inside, every object seemed sharper than before. The water glasses, the legal pads, the silver pen Claire had almost used. Monica Hayes broke the silence first. Richard, did you intend to disclose the labor reduction trigger before or after signature? Her voice was calm, but it had lost every trace of courtesy. Richard turned toward her with practiced disbelief. Monica, let us not become theatrical. Workforce adjustments are a normal part of restructuring. You know that. Monica did not blink. 83 people in Phase 1 is not an adjustment. It is a plan. Daniel Reeves slid the appendix out from under the contract and read 2 lines again, slower this time, as if he hoped repetition might change the meaning. It did not. He looked toward Richard, and Naomi saw something pass across his face that men in expensive suits tried hard never to show in front of clients. Embarrassment. Claire noticed it too. Daniel, she said, did your office draft this language? Daniel set the page down. No. It came from Whitmore Capital's external advisory team in the final revision packet at 9 this morning. Richard gave a small shrug. Because my team understands what it takes to save distressed companies. Naomi almost stayed quiet. Almost. But the room had reached that dangerous point where one clean lie, delivered calmly enough, might still survive. No, she said. It understands how to dress a takeover in rescue language. Richard turned to her with open irritation now. I think we have all indulged this long enough. He looked toward Claire. If your building staff are going to take part in executive negotiations, perhaps someone should have vetted their credentials before the meeting. The insult was meant to pull the room back to hierarchy, back to the old arrangement where status outranked truth. Naomi felt it hit, but not the way he intended. Not as shame, as clarity, because now he was not defending the clause anymore. He was defending the right to be the kind of man no one questioned. Claire leaned back and studied him for one long second. Then she turned to Naomi again. Do you know what happens after Phase 1? Richard laughed once, too fast. Surely we are not doing this. Claire never took her eyes off Naomi. Do you? Naomi nodded slowly. If the benchmark misses again, the committee can recommend asset consolidation, lease exits, and departmental outsourcing. Support staff first, because they are the easiest to call non-essential on paper. Monica drew in a breath through her nose. Daniel flipped to the next flagged section and went still again. She is right, he said quietly. There is a secondary trigger. Richard stood up then, not abruptly, but with the hard control of a man realizing the floor had changed beneath him. This meeting is losing all proportion, he said. Claire, if you walk away from my capital because a cleaner misreads strategic language, your board will not forgive you. Claire rose too, and in the reflection of the darkening glass, Naomi saw them side by side. Richard with his silk tie and investor certainty, Claire with one hand on the closed contract and the other resting flat against the table like she was holding the room steady. No, Claire said. My board might forgive a difficult quarter. They will not forgive me for signing away the company because I was too arrogant to listen to the only person in this room who was not trying to own a piece of it. For a moment after Claire spoke, even the lights seemed too bright. Richard Whitmore stood at the far end of the table with one hand braced against the back of his chair, his face arranged into the kind of restraint wealthy men mistook for dignity. But Naomi could see the change now. The practiced ease was gone. In its place was something tighter, meaner, the look of a man who had expected obedience and found scrutiny instead. Snowy sleet hissed against the windows behind him, and the city beyond the glass had faded into a wash of gray towers and pale evening light. Monica Hayes slowly closed her tablet and turned it face down on the table, as if she had no interest in distractions anymore. Daniel Reeves gathered the loose pages into a neat stack, though his fingers were not as steady as they had been at the start of the meeting. Claire remained standing, one palm still resting on the closed contract. Naomi stayed beside the housekeeping cart, the metal handle cool under her hand, the scent of lemon cleaner and paper and burnt coffee hanging together in the chilled air. Richard let out a small breath that was almost a laugh. "This has gone far enough," he said. "Claire, you are under pressure, your company is bleeding cash, and now you are letting a building employee steer you away from the only serious capital on the table." He looked toward Naomi, and his eyes sharpened. "Tell me something. Do you always stop meetings you do not belong in, or is today a special performance?" Naomi did not answer. She had spent too many years learning the difference between a question and a trap. Richard took her silence as permission. "I know this type," he said, turning back to the room as though Naomi were no longer a person but an example. A little partial knowledge, a little family history, and suddenly they think they understand leverage, governance, market timing. Daniel glanced down. Monica's jaw tightened. Claire said nothing yet, and that silence became its own kind of test. Richard stepped around the chair and placed both hands on the table. "You do not save a company by listening to fear from the sidelines," he said. "You save it by making hard choices. That is business." Naomi felt the old sting of it, not because his words were new, but because they were not. She had heard versions of that tone in classrooms, interviews, elevators, and break rooms, always delivered with the same polished certainty, as if intelligence could be measured by job title and skin tone, and where a woman happened to be standing when she noticed the truth. Claire turned toward her at last. "Naomi," she said, calm and clear, "did you read anything else in that packet we need to know about before he leaves this room?" Richard straightened. "Before I leave this room?" Claire did not look at him. Naomi's fingers loosened from the card handle. She replayed the pages in her mind the way she always did when language unsettled her, clause by clause, cross-reference by cross-reference, each phrase fitting into the next like hidden teeth. Then she nodded once. "Yes," she said. "There is a fee schedule buried in the back. If the deal is delayed by internal review, your company pays his firm a penalty. Not because the review changes anything, because the delay itself becomes billable." Monica looked up so fast her chair gave a soft scrape against the floor. Daniel flipped to the exhibits. Richard said, "That is standard protection against wasted time." Naomi held his gaze for the first time since Claire had risen. "No," she said quietly. "It is a clock. You wrote the trap, then charged them for noticing it." And when Daniel found the page and went pale under the conference room lights, nobody defended Richard after that. The room changed after that in a way Naomi had felt only a few times in her life, those rare moments when a lie stopped being protected by confidence and started standing naked under fluorescent light. Daniel Reeves did not try to soften what he was seeing anymore. He turned the exhibit toward Claire Bennett and traced the paragraph with the end of his pen, not touching the paper, just hovering above it as if the language itself carried a kind of stain. "The review delay penalty is real," he said, "and it compounds every 5 business days." Monica Hayes let out a breath so slow it almost sounded like disbelief leaving her body. Richard Whitmore stayed standing, but the center of gravity in the room had moved away from him now. He was no longer the man bringing salvation to a struggling company. He was a man beside a contract no one trusted. Outside the windows, the sleet had thickened into a pale blur, and the city lights below were beginning to turn on one by one, soft squares of gold in the blue-gray dark. Naomi could see her own reflection in the glass panel near the door, faint and doubled over the skyline. A woman in a cleaning uniform standing inside a room built for people who never expected to be corrected by someone like her. Claire opened the contract again, not to sign it this time, but to study it with the kind of care people reserve for damage after the impact. Daniel, she said, if I had signed this today, how exposed would we have been? Daniel did not rush the answer. He adjusted his glasses, looked at the main agreement, then the appendix, then the fee schedule. When he finally spoke, his tone had none of a lawyer's usual cushioning. You would have retained the appearance of control for 1 quarter. After that, if revenue missed the benchmark, the oversight committee would have operational authority, labor cuts would begin, and any attempt to pause implementation through internal review would trigger financial penalties. In practical terms, Whitmore Capital would have gained leverage over the company before your board fully understood the cost. Claire kept her eyes on the page. And if we resisted? Daniel looked at Richard before answering. Then litigation risk rises, which may have been part of the design. No one moved after that. Monica sat back slowly, one hand pressed to the edge of the table as though she needed to feel something solid. Richard gave a smile that no longer convinced anyone, then buttoned his jacket with measured, irritated fingers. This is becoming hysterical, he said. Aggressive deal structure is not fraud. It is negotiation. Naomi might have let that pass if he had stopped there. But he did not. His gaze slid to her again, and the contempt in it had lost its polish. And I refuse to have my reputation judged by someone whose professional experience involves wiping fingerprints off conference room glass. The sentence hung in the air, ugly in its certainty. Naomi felt the familiar heat behind her ribs, that old pressure between silence and dignity. She had spent years being underestimated in ways so casual they were treated like weather. Too quiet, too black, too working class, too invisible until the moment someone needed a room cleaned, a mess removed, a truth ignored. Claire lifted her head then, and when she looked at Richard, her face had gone almost perfectly still. No, she said. Your reputation is being judged by the contract you brought into my building. Richard opened his mouth, but she was not finished. And for the record, Naomi did not embarrass you. She revealed you. The words settled over the table with the clean force of a door locking. Naomi did not smile. She did not need to. She only looked at the contract, then at Claire, and understood that the meeting had crossed a line it could never uncross. Whatever happened next, Richard Whitmore would leave that room smaller than he had entered it. Richard Whitmore did not leave immediately. Men like him rarely did when a room stopped belonging to them. They lingered, adjusted a cuff, reached for calm, searched for one last angle that could make defeat look strategic. He smoothed the front of his jacket and gave Claire Bennett a tight, practiced smile, the kind built for cameras and annual reports. You are making a mistake, he said. Not a moral mistake. A financial one. The market will not care about anyone's bruised feelings when your runway disappears in 90 days. Claire did not sit down. Neither did Monica Hayes. Daniel Reeves remained half bent over the contract, one hand on the exhibit pages, as if he did not trust the language enough to let it out of his sight. Naomi stayed beside the housekeeping cart near the wall, every muscle in her body aware of itself now, aware of the silence, the chilled air, the faint rattle of ice against the glass. She could feel the room stretching into a new shape around her, one where people no longer looked through her, but at her, and that carried its own kind of weight. Richard stepped away from the table and moved slowly toward the windows, careful, controlled, giving himself distance enough to appear thoughtful. The skyline reflected across the glass in a grid of early evening light, and for a moment his silhouette floated over the city like a cutout of authority. You think you have uncovered something sinister, he said, turning back. What you have uncovered is how real deals are made. Pressure, protection, leverage. The grown-up world is not kind. Naomi almost looked away, but did not. She had heard that sentence before too, in different forms, from people who wanted cruelty mistaken for sophistication. Monica folded her arms. There is a difference between hard terms and concealed extraction, she said. Richard ignored her. His attention settled on Claire again. You came to me because your board is nervous, your lenders are circling, and your revenue is unstable. I offered a path. If you walk away now, you will still need capital. And the next firm will ask why this one collapsed. Claire took a single slow breath. This one collapsed because it was built to. Daniel straightened then, pages still in hand. Claire, he said, before anyone leaves, there is one more issue. The room sharpened. Richard's expression did not change, But Naomi saw it in his eyes first, that quick hard flicker of annoyance men showed when a problem refused to stop multiplying. Daniel tapped the last page of the exhibit. There is a confidentiality clause attached to the review process. If your team had discovered these provisions after signing and discussed them externally, Whitmore Capital could have claimed reputational damage and sought injunctive relief. Monica stared at him. You mean they could have trapped us and then penalized us for warning anyone? Daniel did not soften it. Yes. Claire looked down at the pages in his hand, then at Richard, and something about her stillness deepened. Naomi felt a cold ripple move through her arms. It was one thing to suspect a takeover, another to realize silence had been priced in too. Richard gave a short laugh that convinced no one. Protective confidentiality is standard. Naomi heard herself answer before the room asked her to. Only if both sides are being protected. Richard turned toward her with open disdain. You really do enjoy hearing yourself in rooms above your station. The sentence landed harder than the others because by now it was not even trying to hide what it meant. Naomi felt the insult pass through the room and settle where everyone could see it. Black woman. Cleaner. Too smart for where she stood. Claire's voice, when it came, was quiet enough to make everyone lean into it. Her station, she said, is the reason my company is still mine tonight. And this time, when Richard looked around the table for support, no one gave him any. The silence after Claire spoke did not feel awkward. It felt final, the kind that settled only after a mask had slipped too far to be pulled back into place. Richard Whitmore stood near the windows with the city spread behind him in smeared winter light, his reflection cut across the glass by sleet and office glow, and for the first time since Naomi had entered the room that afternoon, he looked less like power and more like a man calculating damage. Claire Bennett remained standing at the head of the table with the contract closed beneath her hand. Monica Hayes sat upright, no longer shocked now, only focused. Daniel Reeves had spread the most dangerous pages into a narrow fan before him, each clause exposed beneath the white conference lights like evidence laid out in a courtroom that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and lemon polish. Naomi stayed by the housekeeping cart, still enough that she could hear the quiet hum in the vents above them and the ticking of the wall clock near the door, each second moving the room farther away from what it had almost become. Richard looked at Claire and tried one last version of reason. You are overreacting to structure, he said. This agreement was designed to stabilize leadership during volatility. You needed discipline. I offered it. Claire's gaze did not soften. Discipline is not the same as surrender, she said. Richard exhaled, then turned toward Daniel. Surely your legal opinion is not going to be shaped by an evening janitor with a grievance and a talent for dramatic timing. Daniel did not look up right away. He read one paragraph again, then placed his glasses carefully on the table. My opinion is being shaped by the document your team delivered, he said. And the document is indefensible. The word landed clean. Monica glanced toward Naomi, and this time there was no surprise in her expression. Only a growing recognition that the person everyone had ignored for most of the meeting had seen what all of them had nearly signed. Claire drew the contract toward her and opened it one final time. Page 12, page 27. The fee schedule, the confidentiality restraint. Is there anything else? She asked. Naomi hesitated, not because she was unsure, but because she knew what happened when a truth became too complete. People stopped questioning the lie and started questioning the person who found it. But the room had already crossed that threshold. She lifted her eyes to Claire. Yes, she said. The benchmark was never meant to be met. Richard's head snapped toward her. Claire said nothing, waiting. Naomi stepped away from the cart for the first time since she had spoken up, just one step, but enough to make the movement visible. The projected revenue threshold is tied to a client retention estimate in Appendix 2, she said. But Appendix 2 assumes full regional continuity through the quarter. Page 27 cuts facilities and support operations within 30 days of control transfer. That affects delivery, maintenance, response times, vendor flow, all of it. The benchmark drops after the structure changes, but the structure changes are what make the benchmark impossible. Daniel went back to the appendix, faster now, then stopped. Monica leaned over his shoulder and whispered, My God. Richard tried to interrupt, but Claire raised one hand, and he went quiet without meaning to. Daniel looked up slowly. She is right, he said. The performance trigger is not a safeguard. It is a runway collapse built into the model. Naomi felt the room absorb that truth in layers. Not a hard deal. Not aggressive strategy. A sequence. A design. A clean-looking path toward failure that would hand control to the man who claimed he had come to save them. Claire closed the file again, softer this time, almost with care, as if she were shutting the lid on something poisonous. Then she looked at Naomi with a steadiness that carried no pity, only respect that had arrived too late to be comfortable and too honestly to be denied. You did not just catch a clause, Claire said. You caught the whole machine. Richard Whitmore did not speak for several seconds after Claire said that. The quiet around him was no longer the respectful kind that followed authority. It was the colder kind, the kind that arrived when everyone in a room had begun recalculating what a man was worth after the illusion had burned off. He stood near the windows with one hand resting lightly against the glass, winter light cutting across the side of his face, and Naomi could see him trying to choose between anger and composure, between leaving with dignity or staying long enough to force one more version of control back into the room. Claire Bennett made the choice for him. This meeting is over, she said. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. No one signs anything. Daniel, I want a full legal review tonight. Monica, freeze all communication related to this agreement until we know exactly what was built into it. And Richard, you can take your documents and leave my building. The sentence settled over the conference table with a clean finality. Monica was already reaching for her phone, not to text, but to disable the scheduled board update that had been prepared for signature confirmation. Daniel began stacking the flagged pages into separate piles, dividing exhibits from main terms, his face set in the careful focus of a man who now understood he was handling evidence, not paperwork. Richard gave a short, incredulous laugh. Your building, he repeated, turning toward Claire. Interesting choice of words for a chief executive officer whose company may not survive the quarter. Claire held his gaze. It will survive this meeting. That is enough for today. Naomi felt something shift inside her then. Not relief exactly, because relief was soft, and this was sharper than that. It was the sudden absence of a cliff edge beneath her feet. Richard looked around the room, searching again for the weak seam, the person he could still pressure, the person who might decide this had gone too far and pull it back toward politeness. He found no one. His eyes landed on Naomi one last time. Do not look so satisfied, he said. People like you always mistake interruption for influence. This company is still in trouble. All you have done is delay the inevitable. Naomi could have answered in a dozen ways. She could have told him that people like you had been his real mistake all along. She could have reminded him that the inevitable had been written by his own hand. But she had learned something long before she ever pushed a cleaning cart through executive hallways. There were moments when the strongest answer was not more sound, but steadiness. So she said nothing. Claire answered for her. No, she said. What she did was give us a chance to face the truth before you priced our silence into it. Richard's mouth tightened. He gathered his coat from the back of the chair, then reached for the contract folder with deliberate fingers, but Claire placed her hand on it before he could lift it. That stays, she said. A copy was submitted to my legal team under review privilege. You may take your briefcase. For the first time that evening, Richard looked genuinely wrong-footed. Not furious, not theatrical, just caught off balance by a boundary he had not expected anyone to enforce. Daniel did not look up, but his voice entered the silence all the same. She is correct. Richard stared at Claire, then at Daniel, then finally at Naomi, as if trying to understand how the center of the room had moved so far without his permission. Outside, the sleet had turned to full snow, soft and steady against the dark glass. Inside, he picked up his briefcase, buttoned his coat, and walked toward the door with the brittle posture of a man who had come in expecting a signature and was leaving with nothing but witnesses. The door closed behind Richard Whitmore with a soft hydraulic hush that somehow felt louder than everything he had said. For a few seconds, no one in the conference room moved. Snow drifted past the windows now in a steady white sheet, blurring the city into soft shapes and scattered light, and the room that had felt so tense an hour earlier now felt strangely exposed, as if the air itself had been stripped down to what was real. Claire Bennett remained standing at the head of the table, one hand still resting on the contract folder, her shoulders held straight but no longer rigid. Monica Hayes lowered herself back into her chair, and pressed her palms together once, the way people did when they were trying to keep adrenaline from showing. Daniel Reeves looked at the closed door, then at the pages spread before him, and let out a long breath that sounded like a man stepping away from the edge of something he had not realized he was standing on. Naomi stayed where she was beside the housekeeping cart, not because she wanted distance now, but because she did not yet know what place, if any, the room had made for her after all this. The blue microfiber cloth still lay folded where she had set it down. The spray bottle caught the conference lights in a thin green gleam. Claire was the first to speak. "Naomi," she said, turning toward her, "please do not go yet." It was not an order. It was careful, almost gentle, and that more than anything made Naomi uneasy. She had spent enough years in office buildings to know how quickly gratitude could shrink into awkwardness once the emergency passed. Daniel began gathering the pages into organized stacks. "I will have a legal memo drafted within the hour," he said. "And I want every version of this agreement compared against the morning revision." Monica nodded. "I will pull internal access logs and message traffic around the update." Then she looked at Naomi, her expression measured, thoughtful. "You saw in 20 minutes what all of us nearly missed in a week." Naomi did not know what to do with praise spoken that plainly. She looked down at her cart, at the black wool streaked with salt from the service hallway, and said the first true thing that came to her. "I was not supposed to be looking." Claire gave a faint, tired smile. "Neither was he," she said, glancing at the door Richard had used. That drew the smallest breath of laughter from Monica, brief and dry, but it broke the heaviness just enough for the room to feel human again. Claire stepped away from the table then and moved closer, not all the way, just enough to leave the distance respectful. "How do you know all of this?" she asked. Naomi hesitated. Snowlight shifted across the glass wall behind Claire, pale and cold against the dark wood paneling. Somewhere beyond the conference room, an elevator bell chimed and faded. The building was still moving through its evening routines while this room sat suspended outside them. Naomi lifted her eyes. "I studied finance for 2 years at Essex County College," she said. "Then my mother got sick. I left school, picked up work, and never made it back." Monica frowned slightly. "You studied finance?" Naomi nodded once. "Accounting, contracts, valuation basics. I used to read case filings at night because legal language stopped feeling random once I understood where the money moved." Daniel looked at her differently after that, not shocked now, but recalibrating. Claire was quiet for a moment, taking that in. "And now you work nights cleaning executive floors," she said softly. Naomi gave a small shrug that was not really a shrug, just a way of holding still without showing too much. "Now I work where people do not mind you being invisible until the glass is dirty." No one answered right away, because there was no easy answer to that. And in the silence that followed, Claire Bennett looked at Naomi Brooks not like a cleaner who had interrupted a meeting, but like a person the room should have recognized long before it ever needed saving. Claire Bennett did not answer Naomi right away. She looked at her the way people looked at a line they should have noticed the first time they read it, not with pity, not even with surprise anymore, but with the quiet discomfort of recognition arriving late. Snow kept moving past the windows in soft white bands, and the city beyond the glass had dissolved into scattered points of amber and ice blue. Somewhere down the hall, a cleaning cart rolled over a seam in the floor, then faded. The building was returning to its usual evening rhythm, but inside the conference room, time still felt suspended, as if everyone there understood they had crossed into the part of a story that could not be undone. Claire finally pulled out the chair beside her and touched the back of it lightly. "Sit down," she said. Naomi glanced at the chair, then at her own uniform, then at the table where men with graduate degrees and polished resumes had almost signed. "Away a company. I am fine here," she said. Claire gave the smallest shake of her head. "No, not there. Here." It was not dramatic. It was not loud. But Monica Hayes looked up sharply, and Daniel Reeves stopped sorting papers for half a second. Naomi felt heat rise behind her ribs in a way that had nothing to do with fear. She walked toward the table slowly, each step measured against the thick carpet, and took the seat Claire had indicated. The leather was colder than she expected. Her cart remained by the wall, blue cloth folded on top, as if 2 versions of her were now visible in the same room. Claire sat down across from her and slid the contract aside. "Monica is freezing the agreement," she said. Daniel is reviewing every revision and tracing where the language changed. I will notify my board personally. Then she paused. But before I do any of that, I need to ask you something plainly. If you had been in my seat this afternoon, what would you have done next? The question settled over the table with a different kind of silence. Naomi had not expected it. Respect was one thing. Trust was another. She looked at the contract, then at the revenue model, then at the legal exhibits still fanned out under the conference lights. I would separate the real problem from the expensive solution, she said. Daniel leaned back slightly, listening now the way he might have listened to outside counsel. Naomi continued, her voice low and steady. Your company does not only have a capital problem. It has a timing problem and a confidence problem. If lenders think you are cornered, every rescue offer comes dressed like control. So I would stop acting cornered first. Monica's brows lifted. Claire said nothing, waiting. I would cut anything cosmetic before I cut people who keep the building functioning, Naomi said. I would renegotiate vendor terms in 90-day windows instead of locking into panic concessions. I would show the board a survival plan built on operations, not optics. And I would ask why your current numbers look weak if the company is still carrying clients that depend on overnight support. Monica turned toward Claire. She is right. We have been treating facilities and support like overhead, but they are part of response time and retention. Daniel glanced at Naomi with something close to admiration now. Claire rested her fingertips against the table, thinking, you are telling me we have been measuring the wrong strength. Naomi nodded once. Yes, and men like Richard count on that. The room stayed quiet after that, but it was no longer the silence of humiliation or tension. It was the deeper silence of a structure being reimagined in real time. Claire looked at Naomi for one long moment, then reached for a blank legal pad and turned it toward her with a pen laid across the top. Then help me rebuild the right one, she said. Naomi looked at the legal pad for a long moment before she touched it. The pen lay across the paper like something far heavier than plastic and ink, not because it was difficult to lift, but because of what it meant in a room like this. For years, doors had opened for her only when someone needed a trash liner replaced, a spill wiped up, a conference table cleared before the next meeting. Now Claire Bennett was asking her to mark the page no one else had read carefully enough to survive. Snow brushed the windows in a steady hush, softening the hard corners of the city outside, and under the conference lights Naomi could see her reflection in the black glass beside the skyline, her gray uniform, her name tag, the careful stillness in her face. She picked up the pen. Start with your lenders, she said. Her voice was quiet, but nobody interrupted. Not with a rescue story. With a control story. Tell them you found concealed trigger risk in a late-stage proposal and terminated review before exposure. That does two things. It explains the delay, and it tells them your leadership is paying attention. Daniel Reeves nodded once and made a note of his own. Monica Hayes turned her tablet back over and began typing, not fast now, but with purpose. Claire watched Naomi with the kind of focus people usually reserve for experts they had spent months trying to hire. Naomi wrote 3 words at the top of the pad in neat block letters: stabilize, preserve, rebuild. Then below them, she listed the first steps in a hand made steadier by years of doing hard things without applause. Freeze non-essential expansion. Audit vendor leakage. Protect overnight operations. Reframe support staff as retention infrastructure. Daniel read over the list and let out the smallest breath of disbelief. This is not theory, he said. Naomi shook her head. No, this is what people miss when they only read from the top down. Claire lowered herself into the chair across from her, no longer opposite, but level. If I ask you to stay tonight, she said, would you? Naomi looked up, caught off guard less by the question than by the way it was asked. Not as charity, not as spectacle, as if her answer actually mattered. She thought of the service elevator waiting at the end of the corridor, of her time card, of the way invisible work usually continued while important people congratulated themselves for seeing it too late. Then she looked at the contract pushed aside at the edge of the table, the one Richard Whitmore had expected to turn into a trap, and at the clean legal pad in front of her, already turning into something else. Yes, she said. For tonight. Claire gave a tired smile, small but real. Tonight is enough. Monica stood and crossed to the wall, where Naomi's cart still waited by the door. For a second Naomi thought she might move it out of the way. Instead, Monica lifted the blue microfiber cloth, folded it more neatly, and set it on the top shelf beside the spray bottle with an almost careful respect. It was such a small gesture Naomi nearly missed the meaning of it. Daniel gathered the contract exhibits into a red-lined folder and wrote review hold across the front in dark ink. Claire took Naomi's legal pad and turned it so all three of them could see. Snow kept falling outside, quiet against the glass, while inside the room the shape of power had shifted into something plainer and better. No one said anything for a while after that. They just worked. Pens moved. Pages turned. Numbers were questioned. Assumptions were stripped down to their bones. And near the end of the hour, when Claire rose to refill the water glasses herself instead of calling anyone in, she paused by Naomi's chair and said softly, almost to the window, almost to herself, "You understood business." He only understood power. Naomi did not answer. She only